Bullies thought they could break him. They never imagined Daniel was hiding a secret that would upend life at Harrington High. Welcome to Epic Stories, the channel that brings you real accounts of epic transformations and unforgettable lessons. If you enjoy hearing about triumph over adversity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Now, let us dive into one of the most shocking tales you'll ever encounter. Stay until the very end to discover how an ordinary student turned into every bully's worst nightmare. Daniel was always the quiet one at Harrington High. Smaller than most boys his age and rarely speaking up in class, he preferred to spend his free time reading or sketching heroes from his favorite comic books. He wore outdated clothes, carried a hand-me-down backpack, and tried to shrink into the background. While other students might have joined sports teams or clubs, Daniel quietly slipped through the halls, hoping no one would notice him. Unfortunately, his very attempt at invisibility seemed to make him a perfect target. Among all the potential tormentors at Harrington High, the worst was Marcus. Tall, imposing, and constantly flanked by his loyal followers, Marcus had turned bullying into an art form. Students whispered that even some teachers feared him, choosing to look the other way rather than intervene. Where Marcus led, chaos followed. Lockers would be banged shut on unsuspecting kids, lunches stolen, and rumors spread like wildfire. And Daniel, timid and unassuming, became Marcus's favorite victim. Each day brought a fresh wave of abuse. Marcus would shove Daniel against the lockers, knock books out of his hands, or hurl insults that echoed down the corridors. Nobody stepped in to stop him. Some laughed along to avoid being targeted themselves, others just kept their heads down, silently grateful they weren't the ones in the bully's crosshairs. Over time, Daniel endured it all with clenched fists and trembling lips, bottling up his fear and humiliation. He told himself that fighting back would only make everything worse, but deep inside, a storm was brewing. That storm broke on a Friday, when the school was buzzing with its usual pre-weekend excitement. In the packed cafeteria, Daniel carefully balanced a tray of food, determined to avoid any trouble. He sensed Marcus's gaze the moment he walked in. Sure enough, as Daniel tried to reach an empty table, a foot slammed into his path, sending him sprawling. The tray flew out of his hands and crashed to the floor with a deafening clatter. Worse still, ketchup and mashed potatoes splattered across Daniel's shirt, and the remains of his sandwich clung to his hair. The entire room erupted in laughter, phones whipping out to capture the spectacle. Marcus stood by, feigning wide-eyed innocence, then burst into a mocking grin. "Hey, look, it's Daniel the human garbage disposal," he announced, clapping for effect. His gang, always eager to please their leader, cackled and pointed at Daniel's disheveled state. As Daniel scrambled to pick himself up, face burning with shame, Marcus hoisted a carton of chocolate milk overhead and dumped it all over him. The crowd cheered as Daniel stood there, dripping, humiliated, fists balled so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. That night, Daniel lay awake in bed, replaying the cafeteria scene again and again. He could practically hear the echo of jeering laughter, see the flash of camera phones, and feel the wet drip of milk sliding down his neck. He'd never felt rage like this before, hot, urgent, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't just anger toward Marcus, it was anger at himself for letting it happen. For years he told himself that avoiding confrontation was the safest route. But as he lay there, eyes wide open in the darkness, he realized he couldn't live like this anymore. The time had come to do something about his situation. The next day, Daniel made a choice that would change his life forever. He was going to learn how to fight back. But how? Signing up for the school's official boxing club seemed impossible. Marcus and his crew basically owned that space. A high-end gym in town was out of the question. Daniel didn't have the money. Then he remembered hearing rumors of an old martial arts studio on the outskirts of the city. People said it was run by a solitary man in his 60s who rarely took new students. Some joked he was crazy, an ex-champion who shut himself away from the world. Daniel didn't care if it was true or not, he had no other options. That evening, Daniel found himself outside the worn-down dojo. The wooden sign above the door was chipped, and one of the windows had a small crack. Inside, he was greeted by the faint smell of sweat, old leather, and incense. A tall, wiry man with graying hair stood in the center of the training floor, eyes sharp as a hawk's. This was Mr. Kuroda. Without even saying hello, Mr. Kuroda looked Daniel up and down and said, "You don't look like you belong here." Heart pounding, Daniel summoned his courage. "I need to learn how to fight," he replied, voice surprisingly steady for someone so nervous. Mr. Kuroda snorted. "Go sign up for a karate class at the community center if you want to play with belts and uniforms." But Daniel held his ground, shaking his head. "I don't have time for that. I don't want trophies. I want to learn how to defend myself no matter what it takes." For a moment, the older man's hardened gaze softened. After a tense silence, Mr. Kuroda finally said, "Come back tomorrow at dawn. We'll see if you're serious." From that day forward, Daniel became a fixture at the dojo. Before sunrise, he'd be there, sweeping the floor or running laps at Mr. Kuroda's command. Training wasn't flashy. There were no neat rows of uniformed students, no belts to earn, no photos of champions on the walls. It was raw, grueling work. Mr. Kuroda would bark, "This isn't a game. This is survival," right before making Daniel throw hundreds of punches until his knuckles bled against the battered sandbag. He taught Daniel to stay light on his feet, to read an opponent's movements, and to strike with precision and power. Weeks passed, each day bringing Daniel to the brink of exhaustion. Yet with every bruise and blister, he felt something change inside him. His stance improved, his reflexes sharpened, and he found an iron will he never knew he had. Somewhere between blood and sweat, Daniel let go of his old fears. He was no longer just that small kid cowering behind textbooks, he was learning to stand up for himself. And as his body grew stronger, so did his resolve. The memory of that cafeteria incident served as fuel, driving him to push harder. By the end of the 4th week, Mr. Kuroda called Daniel over. "Fight me," the old man commanded. Initially stunned, Daniel hesitated. But then he moved, unleashing a swift combination of strikes he'd been practicing. Although Mr. Kuroda deflected most of them with ease, there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You're ready," he said simply. In that moment, Daniel realized he was no longer the frightened boy he'd been a month ago. A deeper confidence rooted itself in his mind and heart. Monday morning arrived, crisp and cool. Daniel walked through the double doors of Harrington High feeling like a completely different person. Gone was the timid shuffle, replaced by a steady, self-assured stride. His classmates noticed. Some whispered that he looked taller. Others couldn't quite put their finger on what had changed, but they sensed something formidable lurking beneath his calm demeanor. As Daniel made his way to his locker, he braced himself, knowing that Marcus was never far away. Marcus, as expected, appeared with his entourage, blocking Daniel's path. "Heard you've been hiding out," Marcus sneered, staring Daniel down with that same menacing grin. "About time you showed your face." The halls seemed to hold their breath. Dozens of onlookers paused, eyes fixed on the developing confrontation. Instead of cowering, Daniel stood still, meeting Marcus's gaze head-on without a trace of fear. "Got nothing to say, short stuff?" Marcus goaded, stepping closer. "That's fine. Let us see if you remember how to scream." Without warning, Marcus lunged, grabbing for Daniel's collar. But in the split second Marcus's hand shot forward, Daniel moved. It was lightning quick, a blur to those watching. He seized Marcus's wrist, twisted, and forced him off balance. A gasp rippled through the crowd as Marcus stumbled, eyes wide in shocked pain. Marcus's loyal friends sprang into action, but Daniel was ready. One swung wildly at Daniel's head, only to miss as Daniel ducked and delivered a precise counterstrike, sending the attacker staggering backward, clutching his ribs. The hallway fell silent except for the sounds of scuffling feet and startled murmurs. This was something nobody had witnessed before Marcus and his crew on the losing end of a fight. Marcus, wincing and red-faced, tried to regain control. "You're dead," he spat through gritted teeth. "You'll regret this." Summoning the last of his pride, he threw a right hook at Daniel's jaw. But Daniel blocked it effortlessly, stepping to the side and planting a calculated elbow into Marcus's ribs. The taller bully doubled over, gasping for air. An onlooker, Adam, one of Marcus's own friends, finally found his voice. "Marcus, stop," he said quietly, uncertainty in his eyes. Another voice chimed in from the crowd, "This is enough, man. Give it up." More students began murmuring in agreement. The realization that their school's untouchable tyrant had been bested was spreading like wildfire. Marcus, shoulders quivering in anger and humiliation, glared at Daniel with a mixture of hatred and fear. He tried to speak, but only a croak came out. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed away, leaving a stunned crowd and a battered pride behind him. One by one, his followers peeled off to trail behind him, no longer the triumphant bullies they had once been. Daniel stood, chest heaving, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He could see phone screens glowing videos that would surely be circulated among the student body by nightfall. But this time, it wasn't Daniel who be humiliated online. A small ripple of applause started somewhere behind him. Someone else clapped, then another, until it seemed half the hallway was cheering. A few kids gave Daniel approving nods or patted him on the shoulder as he slipped away, not eager to bask in the spotlight but relieved that he finally stood up for himself. He no longer felt like a victim. He felt free. No more shrinking, no more skirting the hallways in fear. Daniel had faced his tormentor and won. As he headed to class, people parted to let him pass, many of them offering him small smiles of acknowledgement. After years of invisibility, Daniel felt like he finally existed in their eyes and in his own. What do you think of Daniel's transformation? Have you ever watched a bully get exactly what they deserve? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe to Epic Stories for more tales of resilience and triumph. In the weeks that followed, Harrington High saw subtle but meaningful changes ripple throughout its hallways. Younger students who had once walked hunched over, eyes down, began to stand a little straighter. Conversations about bullying and self-defense took place more openly, and teachers, finally seeing that their indifference had tangible consequences, stepped up efforts to address harassment. Even Marcus's friends began to think twice before picking on anyone. More than just a single victory, Daniel's stand sparked a shift in the school's atmosphere. Because of Daniel's brave transformation, students learned that bullies can be confronted when you have the right support, mindset, and determination. His story became a rallying cry for self-empowerment, reminding everyone that no one has to accept humiliation as their fate. Discussions at local community centers brought renewed emphasis on teaching kids to stand against injustice. Parents and educators found inspiration in Daniel's courage, promoting respect, empathy, and conflict resolution in the classroom. Ultimately, Daniel's journey shows us that change often starts with a single stand, and that each of us has the strength within to transform fear into resilience.